I take ownership of the fact that I completely flubbed the opportunity to investigate at a time when we could have literally nipped this thing in the bud, and all of us suffered for it. The kids did, my wife did.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I am grateful to have you here for this episode, as I am for everyone. And today I'm fulfilling my promise to you with another amazing success story. And I actually have personal engagement with our guest today, Robert Cujo Teschner, because Cujo and I and my tech group, he presented to my tech group in July, and it was you're in for a big treat. It was the kind of phenomenal presentation that you get every so often, and this guy is just so amazingly accomplished, but also amazingly engaging and humble and helpful. Like a guy who's willing to just, his whole goal in life, it seems like, is to help people, and people like that always get me really excited. So enough of my sort of man love here. I am going to tell you a little bit about Cujo, as he likes to be called, and then we're going to get into it. So Robert Cujo Teschner is a retired F-15 and F-22 fighter pilot. He is also a former F-15 Weapons School Instructor, which is the U.S. Air Force's Top Gun school, an F-22 Fighter Squadron Commander, Senior Joint Staff Officer, and combat veteran. He holds advanced degrees in operational art and science and national security strategy, and has extensive experience in operational and tactical planning, as well as in organizational leadership. From 2004 through mid-2006, Cujo served as the U.S. Air Force's expert in post-mission debriefing, the methodology used by high-performing military teams to self-correct and improve continuously. He retired after becoming a full colonel due to complications from colon cancer-related care. Cujo started VMax Group, a leadership and teamwork training company based in St. Louis, Missouri. VMax's purpose, and I love this, is to teach and inspire real teamwork so that teams can thrive in disruption and keep America's economy strong. Well done with that, Cujo. Cujo is a multi-award-winning fighter aviator and leader, an award-winning writer and author of the national best-selling book, Debrief To Win, which he was kind enough to give me an autographed copy of I actually won this, didn't I, Cujo? I won That's it right. For doing something. I can't remember what. It's a phenomenal book, and we'll talk a lot about the book today. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, writing a book is not hard enough for him, I guess. He is simultaneously working on 2 new books on leadership, the first of which is titled An American Fighter Pilot, Lessons Learned Beyond Mach 1. It's a cool title. That is slated for release in the spring of 2022. And the other book, Cujo, what is that one called that you're working on?
We're still working on the title, and we're kind of keeping things close hold. So it's a group project that'll come out around the same time, spring to summer of next year.
Okay, cool. So with that introduction, I am ready to get started. And Cujo, I start every episode with the same simple question: how did it happen for you?
Great question. Brilliant introduction. Very, very glad to be here with you today, Mike. And thanks for the invitation. It was so nice meeting you at the tech meeting. Can answer that a number of ways. How about today we answer it with, it started with the cancer diagnosis. It started with a day when my wife was, I'd say 5 months pregnant with our 4th child. It was a beautiful day, a sunny day, atypical day for that time of year in Stuttgart, Germany. And when I woke from my colonoscopy, I was getting ready to give both the doctor and my wife some grief for me having had to go through that experience for what I thought was going to be for no reason. And instead, I woke up to the news that the doctor had horrible news for me. The tumor he thought was probably 10 years old. And we didn't know if we were, days, weeks, or months away from the end of it all. So I think it all started right there, Mike.
And was that your first colonoscopy?
That was my first colonoscopy. I was 40 years old when I had that.
Okay. So
And
you're doing everything right, sort of waiting till you're 40. That's when they tell you to have your first colonoscopy. And you like me, you're like, why do I need to go through this? I don't need this. Right?
yeah, ish. I wish it was that pure, Mike.
Okay. What is
The
it then?
first time that I had any symptoms worth talking about was when I was 30.
Oh,
The
okay.
first time that my body gave me indications that things were not exactly right was back when I was a brand new instructor, just going back through the instructor qualification course at the Fighter Weapons School. And I didn't have time to be sick. I didn't have interest in hearing that there was anything not right with me. So I chose not to speak about it to anybody, not investigate anything, and just kind of will myself well. And a few months later, things were back to normal. And then a decade later, it's actually the second time that I have symptoms that causes me to have a conversation with my wife, which then leads to let's go talk to the doc. Multiple doctors saying, you're young, you're fit, you're fine. My wife saying, that doesn't pass muster for me. And then ultimately with a friend of mine who was a doctor who my wife conspired with, who recommended that I go in and get this thing checked out. Turns out that my wife was right. My doctor friend that she conspired with was right. And I was almost horribly wrong. So I'd start there, Mike. I'd say that's where it all began.
Okay. So if that's how it happened, what happened? I mean,
Yeah, then the question is what are we talking about? Yeah. Before that, I used to fancy myself as a fighter pilot. Like, I really thought I existed to fly fighters, to defend our great nation. I thought that was my whole reason for being. And I was pretty good at what I did. I really enjoyed the flying part of what I did, especially as a younger guy. I thought that was just the best. Cancer was the biggest disruption that I had been through in my life. And for sure, for my family, it was a tremendous disruption. And we went from, and I'm looking over here in the corner of my office, we just moved and we're setting things up over here. I've got my congratulations promotion placard that was put up for all 6 of us that were promoted to bird colonel at the same time in Stuttgart. That happens right after the diagnosis. I get invited to go back and to fly F-22s again, this time to eventually become a senior leader. The career is going exactly on the right trajectory. The family's well, everything's rocking and rolling. And then we get this news and it collapses the entire thing. Can't take the new job. I can't fly. The surgeon is convinced, because we have to remove my lower colon, that if I try to pull 9 times the force of gravity, I'm going to rip apart from the inside. That doesn't sound too sexy to me. If I can't do what it is that I'm trained to do, and if there's a potential of me getting sick again, what do we do? Do we stay in the Air Force? Do we retire? We chose to retire early. I took a demotion. I went from being a full bird colonel, as we call him, to a lieutenant colonel on retirement. We came to St. Louis, which is where I have family, to have some support structure in case I get sick, and didn't know what to do. I mean, really, Mike, it was one of these things where you're comfortably in the midst of your zone, and then something comes in from left field, arguably, it could have been caught earlier, but nonetheless, wasn't expecting to get this kind of a diagnosis. You go immediately into surgery, immediately into your body does not function the way that it's designed to. You're stuck. You've got to be close to a bathroom at all times, and we'll leave it at that. Now, what do you do? How do you provide? How do you take care of your family? How do you find joy in life? All of those were the challenges that we had. And this was in the 2016 timeframe, 2015, 2016, when I retired. And we had to search for our core why and figure out, in my case, who am I? In our case, as a family, who are we? And how are we going to go out there and win? And I remember when my wife and I walked out of the doctor's office that late morning in Stuttgart, I remember being just famished. I was starving, because of all the prep for the colonoscopy.
Sure.
You haven't eaten in a little while. My wife was pregnant. She was hungry. The first thing we did on the heels of of this horrific diagnosis was we went to the bottom floor of the building in which the investigation, whatever you want to call it, the colonoscopy, took place, and ordered lunch. All right, so we had late breakfast, early lunch, and then we started talking. And again, it was a beautiful day. I mean, I think it was like October. No, wait a second, it was March. Whatever. it was March of 2014, and it should have been just gray and nasty. It was sunny and beautiful. And I remember we had a very matter-of-fact talk, my wife and I did. And I distinctly recall saying to her, the story just got better. And
Yeah.
she's like, excuse me? And I'm like, no, the story just got better. Like, you know, it's easy when everything's going smooth like that. It doesn't take much to be able to move out with that. But when everything falls apart, you know, it's your choice as to whether you're going to allow it to collapse you or whether you're going to try and find some way to make it through. And in the fighter domain, you see pictures behind me of F-15s and maybe an F-22. I can't remember. We're used to disruption. We're very much expecting on any mission, the mission to not to go as the way we had it planned. And so our kind of core ethic is the story got better that we're going to be able to tell on Friday night at the bar. And it's just up to us to kind of guide this new version of the story to a successful outcome. And that was our ethic. And I'll stop there because that's a lot, Mike. That's a lot, but it provides some context for, you know, why I chose to start today's conversation there.
Okay. And I had I've got a ton of questions off of that, but the thing that you caught me with at the end there that I couldn't forget is the bar thing, because if I remember from your talk, you talked about the bar thing in the Air Force where I think you said the rule in the bar was that it had to be, whatever you said had to be at least 10% true.
That's
or
right.
something along those.
That's
Okay.
right.
So now you've got something that's 100% true that people are going to hear and wish it was only 10% true.
Yeah, that's that's right. That's exactly right. So what you're referencing, Mike, is our tribal ritual of roll calls. We have roll calls every Friday night, and we get together as a tribe, fighter pilot tribe, and we tell stories from the week. And the ethic is one of joy and celebration. I mean, we're fired up to have made it to the end of another successful week of flying. We're there to have a good time and to enjoy each other's company, to let the stress kind of wash away from the week, and to celebrate and also learn. And the stories that we tell have to be at least 10% true. So they're hilarious until you get to a story that needs to be 100% true, because we're all going to learn from it. And everybody kind of understands, hey, this is one of those kinds of stories. And what can we learn from it? And I think, in fact, I would say that the roll call story tied to this one is a necessary one for everybody to learn, because we're not indestructible and we can't will ourselves to health. And we do have to pay attention to what our body's telling us. So there's a component there of learning that that certainly applies to all of us.
Yeah, nice. So the doctor finds this tumor, gives you the prognosis. Did you? I mean, you said you went down. You had this breakfast, lunch, brunch, whatever, and then you said to your wife that the story just got better. And I was thinking to myself, man, if I were you, I might still be thinking at that early stage, oh, this is just a thing. No, they'll take it out and I'll be fine. And I'll just go back, I'll be off for a little bit and then I'll be back teaching. I'll be back flying. I'll be back doing all the things that I was built to do. But it seems like you might have, already recognized that might not be a possibility or wouldn't be.
Not quite then. In fact, I had exactly that attitude that you just described. Like, okay, fine, whatever we need to do, we're gonna rip this out. We're gonna clean things up, and I'm gonna get right back into it, because I'm not stopping what it is that I like doing. And we went through the next 4 days. It was like a big sine wave of emotions for both my wife and I. There was times of elation, like, hey, we got this thing. There was times of, this thing's got me. And we kind of went back and forth a little bit. But I distinctly remember on day 4, post-diagnosis, just being overwhelmed with the notion that this might be it. Like, we may be coming to the end and landing from our last mission, as it were. And that was a bit overwhelming. That sucked all the air from my lungs, for sure. And then another point that stands out in my mind, because that just note of finality, like there's nothing else that you can do and you're totally at the mercy of others. That's a tough one to come to grips with. The other one that really stands out in my mind was the day after my first surgery, and I'm lying there and I've got, I'm totally dependent upon others for help, and I can't do anything I'm subject to the will and the whims of the doctors and the nurses. And I was overcome with emotion there. And it was a really positive emotion, Mike. It was one of like relief is the best way to describe it. And I was relieved that I finally had empathy for those that were suffering, specifically physically. Like up until that point, I'd always aced all of my medical checkups. I was always, perfect vision, perfect this, everything is good, checkout's fine, fit, trim, healthy. Maybe not so trim at times, but ultimately fit and healthy. I mean, good enough for government work. And all of a sudden, I thought back to a dinner that my wife and I had been at in Washington, D.C. When I was at the National War College. We were guests of a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs who was one of my instructors, and he invited us to come and to celebrate. I think they were honoring Admiral McRaven for something. And so we're in this really sophisticated joint, like the Reagan Center downtown DC. Everybody's dressed all nicely, and at our table, we had a sergeant that was missing both legs, were removed due to an attack in Iraq. And I remember just sitting there with him and shaking hands and thanking him for what he had sacrificed, and not having any understanding of what that meant. Saying the words, but not, having no concept of what it would be like to go through.
Sort of like the words you've been trained to say to somebody that you encounter who's been through something like
Right.
that.
And it felt fraudulent to say them because there is no way to connect unless you've been there.
Right.
And for sure, and and all these generals kept on coming by and shaking hands with him, and he had nothing but disdain for them. He was like, "You don't get it. You're not here. Life is good for you. It's totally." That day in Stuttgart, I had a small glimpse, tiny micro glimpse of what it was that he had lost, and I was so grateful for that, because living a life absent that, you really can't connect with others. And I felt that was a big step forward in my evolution as a human being, for which I'm forever grateful. And that would not have happened had we not excised most of my lower colon because of cancer. So there's so much good that comes from this. We had to get through those early days, but so we did, and here we are. And I think that most everything that has come from it has been a huge positive.
So before I dig into more there, I guess I need to ask you, how is your health now? I'm sure people are thinking, is this guy okay?
Yeah, I'd say it's still good enough for government work. Keeping things at a relatively low standard. It's it's not as good as it once was, but it's good enough. And have to go in for constant scans and tests, and the heart rate goes up and the pucker factor goes higher, and you have enough MRIs, and you just learn to deal with it. And we're blessed, 7 years cancer free this past March. Went in for some more checkups here recently, and they came back good. So that's going to always be there. We're always going to be thinking about it, but it's also a reminder constantly of how blessed we are and how fortunate we are to have made it through the worst of those times at that stage. And we pray constantly for all of those who are in the same circumstances, because we get it. We know what it's like as a family, by the way, because it's a family affair.
Sure. Well, glad to hear that. Good for you.
Thank you.
Let's keep that up, okay?
Yes.
This is your takeaway. Keep that
That's
up.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
When you in the bio we mentioned the Air Force's sort of Top Gun, which is what you were in, and most people listening to this are, I'm sure, familiar with the Top Gun movie and Tom Cruise and what that was all about. And I think most people probably don't have, unless they have someone in their family who is a firefighter pilot, probably don't have much of a reference point or frame of reference outside of that. And one of the things that, and I want to get into that with you, but I remember when you started talking to us at the tech meeting, because when you get introduced as a fighter pilot and a military guy and all this stuff, it comes with certain perceptions, whether it was Tom Cruise movie or whether it was many others. Jack Nicholson comes to mind. I can't remember the name of the movie, but
A Few Good Men.
A Few Good Men. Thank you. Yes, it's there's a certain sort of perception that precedes or accompanies that kind of introduction, and you did something very different when you, after a similar introduction, you came out and in an attempt, I think, to humanize yourself and disarm us. You asked us right off the top to go around the room and say, what is your perception of me, or something like that. So what makes you do that? What's the reason for that?
Well, I think we're pretty good as human beings at kind of packaging people, putting them in bins, categorizing folks, creating boundaries and separation points, finding reasons to not be able to connect with one another. Oh, you come from wherever, and so therefore you must think like this, and so therefore we're never going to be able to be fully met. And sometimes I listen to the things that people say about me, and I wonder if I were to meet myself based upon this introduction for the first time, would I like me or not? Would I judge me or not? How does this factor in? And I think on your day, I was having one of those moments of reflection, and it occurred to me, why don't we just talk about this? Wouldn't that be just kind of neat? I'll be curious to know what you think about me before I even start talking. And then if there are some negative stereotypes, perhaps if there's some categorizing that we can together work on disbanding, I think we can create this connection in a tech meeting scenario. What I really want is for you as one of my attendees to buy into the notion that my team can become a high performance team. We can learn to practice accountability the way that these jet pilots do. We can achieve more than we already do. We're already outstanding. We can be that much better. And I think one of the techniques to do that is to connect on a very human level. And that was part of the effort there. And I have to say, your group was very good at accommodating and answering and helping us to grow.
Yeah, the approach worked. It was really, because I was sort of, it's kind of intimidating when you know that you're going to be in the company of someone with your kind of credentials, right? It's like we all have our own credentials, and those are pretty significant for most people. It doesn't matter who you are. You've done some great stuff in your life. But it's just, for me, it's like a little different level, it's sort of, my perception was that it was a little different level. And I was really glad you did that, because it was, because I've seen people do the other thing, where their posture is always perfect, and the uniform is, or the whatever they wear is just exactly the way it would be if it were a military uniform, because they're ex-military, and it just comes off. They use it different. They use what they have differently than you use what you have, and I thought that was, for me, it was a welcome approach. So I mentioned Tom Cruise. We sort of have seen that movie. I'm wondering, and by the way, I'm calling him Cujo, which is the name that he was given by his classmates, I guess, right? Or the squad, or whatever it was that you were in. Is that
That's
correct?
right. The 58th Fighter Squadron at Eglin Air Force Base in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. My teammates, when I was a brand new guy, they named me Cujo as a result of stories that were told about me at my naming ceremony.
Okay. So think of Animal House, where John Belushi goes around and he gives each of the pledges
That's right.
a name. It's probably sort of like that, but maybe a little bit different.
A little bit more structured.
Yeah. But so he's not allowed to, right? You're not allowed to, it's sort of a secret what that actually means for you. But I know you told us, look up the movie and you can draw your own sort of conclusions. Is that where we should leave it with people?
That's right. It's in order to honor the process, I can't tell the stories, but
yeah,
you can draw your own conclusions, kind of a thing.
Well, maybe we can tell the story, though, about the first name that you were actually given there, which was, I believe it was FNG 3.
That's right.
Frickin' new guy 3.
Frickin' new guy 3. That's okay. Exactly right. Nicely done. Yeah, there were two FNGs ahead of me, and so I became FNG 3 on day number 1 in my very first fighter assignment.
So that's the respect that you garner, having come out of flight school, but not been in fighter school yet, right?
Yeah, so technically you're qualified on the airplane. You have been through F-15 training, but the tribe hasn't fully embraced you as a lifetime member yet. And so there's a vetting period, and it's an opportunity for them to evaluate you. It's an opportunity for you to come in and demonstrate who you really are. It's one thing to have a curriculum vitae. It's another thing to behave in accordance with what you say that you are. And so we're somewhat, we're patient. We're patient to allow folks to demonstrate their true ethic. And then based upon what they demonstrate over many months, we decide, yep, good fit or not. And if so, let's give them a lifelong call sign. I was named back in 1998. And here it is, it's 2021, and I'm still referring to myself as Cujo.
Right.
And I hope to do so until the day that I die. I'm wedded to it.
Well, I'm glad you're calling yourself Cujo and not FNG3, because that would be a little tough. That'd be a little tough to walk around with for the rest
That's
of your life.
right. That's right.
But I think there's a great takeaway there in that, at this point in your career, you'd gone to the Naval Academy, you'd gone to flight school, you've been elevated into this elite fighter pilot school, and you come in and the people who have already been there aren't willing to just give you immediate respect and recognition, or positive recognition, because to them, you're just the frickin' new guy, one of the frickin' new guys. I think there's a great takeaway there for a lot of us, because we expect that once we reach a certain point, which you had certainly reached by that time, then you walk into a room and everybody should be, know who you are and know what you've done and be impressed. And that you still have to earn that. And that's something you keep having to earn, right? As
Yes.
you go throughout your whole career. As soon as you're in a new audience, you've got a bio, sure, but you're the freaking new guy or the freaking new gal, right? That's who you are. So what do you got for me? How do you prove your worth?
And that's the beauty of this, is that you're constantly pursuing a couple of things. At the fighter squadron level, we're constantly pursuing perfection. Like, we want to fly the perfect mission. We want everything to go exactly as you'd envision. It never does. Never flew a perfect mission. Never in all of my time ever hit the benchmark, but we're striving for it. And so it's that constant pursuit of excellence that kind of motivates you day in and day out when things are tough, when circumstances are challenging. You're always seeking. And that's a really good warrior spirit that I think applies anywhere. And then tied to that is, how are you coming prepared every day to be excellent? And some people talk a good game, but it's really performance driven. We track performance. We've got KPIs as well in the fighter squadron. And what we're always looking to see is, who's the top gun? Every fighter squadron's got one. Who is it that can go out there and perform the best? Who outperforms everyone when it comes to weapons employment? Who's the person who's hardest to shoot down when you're dogfighting them? Who's the person who you don't want to go up against because they're going to shoot you down when you're dogfighting? I mean, we're always, and we got a board, we track those things. We can see who's actually doing it, and the performance speaks for itself. And one of the things that I enjoyed about that particular life is that it was a meritocracy. And so if you demonstrated performance, then you were rewarded for it, in not with monetary compensation, but with the opportunity to learn how to be even better. And that was the whole principle of the weapons school. It still is. You take the best that you have, and you put them through the most grueling 6-month course that the Air Force has, and you make them better. That's the idea of the weapons instructor course, formerly the Fighter Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base. And to go through that, to make it to graduation, to walk across the stage and to be recognized as a graduate, was like by far the highlight of my professional career. To be invited to come back as an instructor was even more stunning, because in my mind, I'm thinking I don't deserve to be here, so why would I even be invited to come back and teach? And those kinds of accolades can distance you from others. It can cause you to think that you're somebody special, and that that you deserve a level of respect that others don't have. Again, I come back to cancer. If I ever had any notions of pride, if ego was getting the better of me, cancer divorced me of all of those afflictions in an instant. Because no longer was it about what the curriculum vitae said. No longer was it about how cool of patch I was wearing or whatever. It was now about, can I survive this thing? Can we find a way to live through this, provide for the family? And what am I really on earth to do? Like what is my true purpose? Right. We spent a lot of time digging into that. And what was neat is that in phase one of life, coming in as a brand new freaking new guy, eventually Cujo, eventually going through my evolution, eventually making it to the level of a squadron commander, I thought I existed to fly airplanes. What I think cancer taught me was that I had a fantastic background, which sets me up then to teach, which a fighter pilot's a teacher first and always, by the way, to teach things that make an impact to make the world a little bit better. And some of those things tie to leadership. Some of those things tie to just general humanness. Some of those things are on the spiritual domain, but there's so much more on this side of the divide than what I was thinking that I was going to devote myself to. And that's one of the many good outcomes of bad news in Stuttgart, which is why I say that's where it all got going.
And what you mentioned meritocracy, and it made me think, I'd love to get your opinion on why you think a meritocracy is so great. Because, and the reason I'm asking is because, and this is probably, I was almost about to say nowadays, and people, you sound so old when you say nowadays, so I don't want to say nowadays, but it does seem like there's a lot more attention being paid to sameness than there is to meritocracy. And it's almost like if you say you are a believer in meritocracy, Cujo, that people might accuse you, or not accuse, but just say, well, it's great to have the privilege to be in a place where you could, thrive in a meritocracy or something along those lines. And I just want to, get your sense about why you are a believer in meritocracy.
Yeah, I think meritocracy ties to integrity. I think you want to have an organization that lives the core value of integrity in all that it does. One of the things that I really appreciated about the Air Force was that regardless of anybody's background, if you went out there and performed, if you achieved mission success consistently, it didn't matter where you came from. All that mattered was you got this thing done, and we asked you to stick around. We asked you to evolve and to grow as a leader. We asked you to be a commander eventually. We asked you to take on more responsibilities because we could trust you with it. It was a relatively pure place to do work. It's flawed. I mean, anything that has humans involved in it, there's going to be issues. Nothing's perfect. I'm not trying to suggest that it is, but I felt like anybody had a chance in that environment to meet their potential and maybe even exceed it. And we were really focused in that world on growing people to be their very best. And we spent so much time coaching people up and helping them to overcome their own inhibitions and limitations to performance, because our goal was to help everybody to be their very best. And going back to my formative years at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, if you think about it, in order to get accepted to a college university, you have to be an outstanding individual achiever, right? You've got to get good grades. You've got to be the president of this and that. You got to have outstanding SAT, ACT scores. You got to have this. Again, it comes down to look at my list of accomplishments and how awesome I am. And you put that front and center, and review boards look at it, and eventually you get accepted or denied. If you get accepted, it proves that you're outstanding. And you can really get into yourself. At the Air Force Academy is where they changed the evaluation dynamic for a bunch of teenagers. I was 17 years old when I started basic cadet training. And if I came out of my dorm room wearing my uniform perfectly, and you mentioned, folks coming from my background and everything's creased and it's tight, it's perfect. And if I looked perfect and my roommate didn't, I was punished, because our standard wasn't how awesome are you? The standard was how awesome are you as a team? And you were judged against the lowest performer. And so our goal was, and our ambition was, to raise the lowest performer's level of achievement. And there were things that I might be really good at. There might be things that I'm not so good at. We figured out who the experts were in all the different fields that we were being evaluated on, whether it was knowledge, whether it was uniform prep, whether it was physical conditioning, whatever. And we would work together so that we as a team got through the challenge, and we were rewarded as a team when everybody passed. And that was a really wonderful dynamic. And, and so so that was part of the equation over here. And it was in that spirit then that we entered into the fighter pilot domain, where now some people are going to be able to get it better than others. There's too much going on for everybody to be, number one. So we're going to track who number one is. We're going to track who number two is, who number three is. And we know that most of the folks are going to be able to hang out sort of in the average, and that's okay. We really want to help those that aren't quite there to elevate their game. And we're going to make a decision early on as to whether or not they're going to be a long-term fit and move them elsewhere. But it was in that environment that I thought we had a really, really good team dynamic. We enjoyed being in each other's company. We loved going on the road together. And what we find is that people miss being involved in that. Like all of my friends who have retired, we all think back fondly on those days and look on them as being kind of the best days, and wish that there were more organizations on, out in the world that had that kind of a vibrancy to them. Even my wife would tell you, she misses me going to roll call. She misses us being involved in the family dynamics of an Air Force fighter squadron. She loved it. I'm sorry for getting a little bit long-winded there.
No, that's okay. I like the way that you tied meritocracy to a group, because when I asked you the question, I was not thinking about it in a group way. And I feel like a lot of people might not think of it in a group way, but when it makes it way more powerful when you describe a meritocracy as the contribution of the entire group to achieving, a particular goal, or how they achieve the goal, or at what level they're able to achieve the goal. So thank you for that. I wasn't, yeah, that's really good. See, that changes the whole dynamic of meritocracy versus, sameness, because it is sameness to be great, right? Sameness as a group to be the best you can possibly be.
And that's our aspiration, is to be the best that we can be, because we're so wedded to our purpose in a fighter squadron. We're so connected to it that it drives us each and every day. Right. It's not money that we're out there to get. It's not fame, certainly not fortune. It's all about contributing to our national defense and being as prepared as we can be, so that when we're called on, we do the job the right way, as expected, to keep our country free. And with that purpose in mind, folks are willing to go into harm's way and give everything. That's a powerful concept. I think Simon Sinek did a very good job articulating what Viktor Frankl wrote about, from his experiences in a concentration camp. The core of that why is enough to get us through the darkest moments, and to cause us to be able to stay focused on that, which is going to allow us to make it through those tough times and come out on the other side that much better. And then if we understand why it is we do what we do, we care to learn how to do it better. All of that's interconnected, and I trace it back to Frankl. It certainly goes back much farther than him, but to books that people have probably read. We've probably picked up Frankl's book, hopefully somewhere along the way, and to things that, have made people multimillionaires. Sinek did a great job with Start With Why, and all of that's connected to this thread of, helping us to become our best, helping us to be the best team that we can be.
Yeah, I imagine some people listening would go back to the Bible on that, but Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, I think is the book you're referring to. And
that's right.
It is amazing how when you have a why, a powerful why, you can put a lot of crap to the side. Like stuff that just derails other people, stuff that is, ultimately distraction, but can easily become front page news for you, right? Mm-hmm. But if you know your why, you can just put it to the side and keep moving forward. So thank you for sharing that. I want to ask an in the weeds question before I start to tie together, or we start to tie together, what you learned in the Air Force with the work that you do now. And I think so the in the weeds question I want to ask you is F-15, F-22, most people have no idea, listening, I imagine, have no idea what those planes are. So I would like, from someone who's, been in, flown, trained, taught, what is the difference between those two planes, and what is it like to be inside of one of those, or operate one of those?
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so the F-15 is the world's greatest air superiority fighter. It's designed to go out and to clear the skies of enemy aircraft so that we can either, go deep into bad guy land and do what we need to do, or protect ourselves from anybody that's trying to attack us. It's a magnificent airplane. It was designed with slide rules in the 1960s. It was first flown in California in 1972. It became operational in the 1970s. We bought maybe 750 of them. It was the backbone of our air superiority fleet. And just from a context standpoint, American troops have not been attacked from enemy air power since 1953. So since the end of the Korean War, which any air superiority pilot would tell you, it's a badge of honor for us.
And when you use the word clear, Cujo, you mean
yes. So we'll take out any airplanes that are in our way. I mean, the airplane is designed around a gigantic radar system that can detect enemy aircraft. And we've got 8 air-to-air missiles on the version that I flew. There's 12 on the new F-15EX that Boeing just released. And those things are designed to eliminate the airplane that might be in our way. So that's core mission set for the air superiority side of things. The F-15 is a 4th generation airplane. So tracing back to, the Wright brothers and the first powered flight, we've evolved in generations, and the F-15 is considered to be a 4th generation of aircraft development. The 5th generation of aircraft development is typified by the F-22 and the F-35. So the F-22 is an evolution on the F-15. It's designed for air supremacy. It also has a primary mission of wiping out any enemy air threats, but it also can go in and drop munitions, drop bombs on targets. And the F-22, it's low observable, so it can get deep into enemy airspace, with, theoretically without them knowing that we're there. It can do things like fly faster than the speed of sound without use of afterburners, so it's more fuel conservative. It's got some really fantastic features that make the workload for the pilot go down. And it's a marked improvement on the core of what it is that the F-15 does. And so to have been able to fly both of those was such an incredible blessing in my world. Now, what does it feel like to fly these things? Imagine being absolutely at your most exhausted ever. Like, you're up all night, kids were sick, you're writing another chapter to your book, you're stressed about finance, you got any number of things on your mind, you didn't sleep a wink, and now you're dragging, you're shaving, coming in, getting ready to go to work. You're like, I don't know if I'm safe to drive. Picture yourself strapping into an F-22 or an F-15 and plugging in the afterburners and getting a charge of adrenaline that wakes you up and is going to keep you awake for the next however many hours that you're out there. It is a rush. I mean, the thrill of feeling the afterburners kicking in behind you and just roaring down the runway and accelerating in no time and lifting off and raising the landing gear and zipping on, and maybe you're flying in close formation to another airplane and you're going out there to accomplish a mission. And we never just fly for the sake of flying. We're out there to achieve some objectives on a given mission. And now you're putting all of your training, all of your knowledge to the test in terms of your physical and your mental execution. You're out there, it's a full contact sport. You're doing things that the body is not accustomed to doing. In the Raptor, when you pull back on the stick, which is like a very, very slight movement on the control stick on the right side of the airplane, you're almost instantaneously at 9 times the force of gravity. The blood rushes out of your brain into your hands, into your feet. You have to fight to stay awake. You're making decisions based off of a dot you see on the horizon as to whether this is a good guy or a bad guy, whether or not you're going to use a weapon. You're merging, at hundreds of miles an hour with a threat. You're transitioning from high speed to slow speed flight, and just doing all this stuff. And then you come back down an hour later, and you realize what you've just accomplished. And you can't duplicate it. I've tried it. I've jumped out of airplanes, ridden motorcycles around, whatever. I've done fun things, but nothing comes close to the rush of being out there and testing yourself always and experiencing those forces. It's a phenomenal way of life. It leads to degradation of the spinal column and all kinds of other issues, maybe even a little bit of colorectal cancer from time to time, but I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade it for anything, Mike. And I'm eternally blessed for having had that background.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because as you were talking it through, I was thinking, okay, so they say the hardest thing to do in sports is to hit a baseball. And I'm thinking to myself, well, geez, if that was the hardest thing to do as a fighter pilot, you'd have a lot of fighter pilots. But what you just described there seems a hell of a lot harder than hitting a baseball. And I guess the book Debrief to Win, you basically take us through in tremendous detail, which thank you for that. I was mentioning that before we went on. I mean, this book Debrief to Win really takes you through how to do an effective debrief, how to build good accountability into your organization. Accountability at a level that I don't think most people listening who will define accountability in a workplace would come even close to being what you're trying, what the Air Force and then what you are doing with VMax Group are trying to build into companies. And I guess I want to start with the debrief in the Air Force. So which is the basis for what you are now doing, right? So you just described, speed of sound or faster, blood leaving your brain, able to clear, the skies, and all of this being done in, I don't know how much space you can travel in a second or a minute.
You can go 10 miles a minute at Mach 1. You're going 10 miles a minute. Mach 2 is 20 miles a minute.
Okay, so phenomenally fast, right? And then you guys do this, which is amazing in and of itself. You land, and you almost immediately get into a room and start talking about what went right with the mission, what went wrong with the mission. And not only that, there's no class in these debriefs, right? So you could be the FNG-3, or you can be the commander. And if the commander was flying or teaching, right? Same thing. And you're in this room. So give everybody an understanding of what that process is actually like, because to most people, I think like, holy crap, I landed the plane. Enough. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's a success. I got back.
That's right.
But that's just the start.
That is just the start. In fact, we would tell you, if you go do a Google search for a fighter pilot debrief, chances are you're going to find multiple articles written by former fighter pilots who would tell you that that's the most important part of the mission. It's not actually flying the mission. It's the debrief of the mission, because that's where we learn. And we know that we're limited. There's not enough gas for you to fly indefinitely. There's not enough sorties, as we call them, missions available to be able to fly every day. So maybe you fly, depending on where you are in the evolution, 8 to 10 times a month. And so how do you get as much bang for the buck, and how do you keep everybody on point with doing what it is that the country's asking of us, given some of those limitations? And the simple answer is you're going to dissect every mission that you flew for everything that you can learn from it, so that the next time out, you're that much better. And, we're human. So there's going to be days when you allegedly learned something yesterday, and today you go out there and you do even worse. But that's just part of the human condition. You're going to learn from that again, and hopefully the next time get it right. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we don't ever get complacent, because complacency kills. And where it really kills us is if we think that the solution to today's problem, the one that we applied in yesterday's planning, is going to solve tomorrow's problem as well, because it won't always. I mean, the world's changing around us at such a fast clip. So we're conscientious of that. We're trying to avoid complacency. We're also trying to avoid the arrogance that says, don't you know who we are? We always win. And if we don't take the time to assess how we're doing, that arrogance is going to hurt us. And so we can't allow either of those afflictions to take root. And then there's this idea that it's such a volatile, such an uncertain, such a complex, such an ambiguous arena in which we operate. The U.S. Army War College coined the term VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That's fighter aviation. In order to consistently pursue excellence, we've got to learn each time that we go out there. And so we do, and we're very disciplined in it. You talk about the amount of time that we spend. We might, at the weapons instructor course, Mike, we would fly missions that lasted an hour, of which maybe 35 minutes was actual tactical execution. You have to fly to the place that you're going to go fight. You have to fly back from, so that takes a huge chunk of time. And we'll debrief that thing for 19 solid hours. And I would never encourage anybody in business, to go through that pain. There's no need to, but in our world, we'll do that to maximize our time, to make sure that we're on point. And what we found is this is the most effective mechanism to ensure that we meet the nation's call always. And those, the notion that you wouldn't do this everywhere is anathema to us. We can't comprehend that the rest of the world doesn't debrief the way that we do, because that is the most effective tool that we have to guarantee performance always.
And do
And
the
we have
drivers? Oh, go ahead.
no, we have a structure for it, so it always looks the same. Like we know, I haven't been in a fighter squadron in years. Or, the last time I flew was in 2012. But if I were to jump into a fighter squadron tomorrow, I guarantee you the structure is the exact same as what I used to teach. The structure doesn't need to change. The principles remain constant. How it is we learn remains constant. What we learn, that's the part that changes. So there's comfort and familiarity in that. When everybody's used to it, when they recognize the value of it, it's not something that's off-putting. It's something that you gravitate towards. It's not that it's easy. It can be difficult to become really well versed at it, but it's such a useful tool that we'll never not do it. We'll always end a mission with a debrief.
And I think I watched one or two debrief videos. You mentioned the videos, and what struck me, well, a couple things. One, when most people think about accountability, like leaders are told all the time, Cujo, like, you got to keep your team accountable, right? And it's an easy thing to say and a difficult thing to do. And I think what's happened, and you tell me if you think this is true. I think what's happened is a lot of people who are on the receiving end of being accountable they hear being punished rather than being accountable, right?
Yes.
Do you agree with that? Okay.
100%. Yes.
Which obviously you can't get anywhere with us with a system that people think is punishing them as opposed to helping them. But when I watched these videos and read your book, because he has actual text of debriefs in the book, and what struck me was that there was no you should have in a debrief. So there was no person saying to another, you should have. It was, I think, it was a question about, did you consider, or something along those lines. And everyone else, as they go around the table, even if they had a perfect mission, like they're getting congratulated on the mission, says, thank you. But as I'm reflecting here, I could have, and then they say something that they could have done that may have improved the mission. And do I have that right? Is that the sort of the approach and the cadence in these things?
You do. And I would say that there's always going to be a spectrum. I mean, there's not one size fits all. There's times when you're going to be prescriptive. There might be a time when I say, look, Mike, I got it. There's all kinds of, but next time, never do that again. Right? You're never going to do it.
If it's danger, right? If it's
right. If it's a dangerous kind of a thing, if it's obvious, time. But what we really want these debrief sessions to be is learning sessions. And the best way to learn something is to help coach somebody through to an answer where they arrive at the conclusion themselves. And if you can get them to come to that self-realization, and if we can create an environment where people can be vulnerable and take ownership, then we've really equipped ourselves to be excellent. Vulnerable, being able to admit to mistakes and weaknesses in front of each other, that's a hard thing to do. It just so happens that in a fighter squadron, that is the constant state of affairs. That's just how it is. We're able to be vulnerable. We have a thing called psychological safety. We reward people for being vulnerable. And if we can admit to mistakes and weaknesses, we can take that one evolution further. We can take ownership of the outcomes. And what's really fascinating to see is on the heels of a failure, it's not uncommon for everybody to offer that they're the reason why the mission wasn't a success. And when you get to the sort of elevated state of teamwork where everybody is fighting somebody else, saying, no, actually this, you can pin this on me because what happened was I didn't do this thing. And then the other person says, well, yeah, that's fine, but that wasn't as big of a deal as my not having done the thing. And the leader stepping in saying, yeah, and I'm the one who managed this whole thing all the way through. And I allowed you to do this, and I allowed you to do this, and I didn't give you guys any additional guidance. It's actually on me. I'll give you 10% and 10%, but 80% of this is me. That's an environment where you really start to elevate. And by elevate, I'm talking, we start to perform. And if we go back to that first question you asked me, and the kind of odd entry that I gave you in response, cancer is where it all kind of took a turn. The reason why I say that is that we took the time my wife and I did to debrief how it is we got into the cancer journey, because it was avoidable. And we followed the same rigor that I taught in the Air Force, that I used on every mission that I flew. We applied it to ourselves, and what we found was that being vulnerable, and really was it's me being vulnerable in front of my wife. I take ownership of the fact that I completely flubbed the opportunity to investigate at a time when we could have literally nipped this thing in the bud, and all of us suffered for it. The kids did, my wife did, I physically did, but I feel bad for what it is that I exposed them to in all of this. And yet the outcome is so much better than if we had never gone through this, because it's through our greatest failures that we accomplish, hopefully, our biggest steps forward. We learn the most and we evolve fastest. It's our ambition as a family to be a high performance team. And cancer was the tipping point in that direction. If I'm teaching teamwork principles to business leaders, or if I'm doing this in the fighters, why aren't we doing this at home? Huge takeaway for me is that a team is a team is a team. And the most important team that some of us are privileged to be on is on the family team. And if we're not concentrated there, and if we're not working every day to be our best in the family domain, then what does the other stuff even matter? If you go back beyond Viktor Frankl and take it back to the Bible, there's a spiritual underpinning to all of this. And I believe it's my obligation to be here for my family. And part of that obligation means talking about things and being open about experiences and keeping those secrets from the people that I love. And so we're working every day to be the best family team that we can be. And that would not have happened had we not gone through the debrief of the cancer journey.
Nice. So thanks for sharing that, by the way.
Of course.
I guess what I want to try to end with here is what has to be true about a company or a leadership team in order for the work that you're doing now at VMax Group to be helpful. So, and I want to I just want to, because there's probably very few companies out there who have a mission like the missions you were describing, right? With all of those high intensity things happening all the time. So there's not that. And they didn't all come out of, the Air Force Academy or the Naval Academy or these, super high echelon places. And they aren't doing work that's important for the national security of our country, for example, and all of these things. So what has to be true what has to be true for you to be able to work and help them?
I think at a very basic level, they have to recognize that as good as they are at whatever it is that they do, that they could be better. Nobody has ever flown the perfect mission. I would argue in any domain. Like we think we're close, but if that's the case, then that's really almost unfortunate, because what kind of a future is there? Like, if you're already maxed out and perfect, then I guess you start to die at that point. I really don't know, and so I think
you can write. Yeah, you've written a story that's not true. How about that? We just
I would agree with you. And so if the fundamental premise is as good as we are, we can be better, then that's the place that we want to have a conversation. And remember this, all of us are doing something that's making an impact. And one of my biggest challenges is listening to a chief executive officer undersell what it is that her company does. All we do here, Cujo, is we make a screw. And so therefore we're unimportant. What I would say is, if that's your view as the chief executive, as the person leading this organization, you're not the right person for that organization. Or I'll give you some grace here and say, maybe you need to spend some time unearthing why it is that you work in this company and find your core why. And that exploration can be a deeply meaningful effort that leads us to recognize the impact that we're truly making by virtue of the screw that we manufacture, or the rubber piece that we've created, or whatever it is that we do around here. And that's necessary. And by the way, every company employs somebody who is able to live their life because of the compensation they get from this company. So there's additional meaning in that. We've got to keep these doors open. And then on a strategic level, all these small businesses have got to succeed if we want to have an economy that's strong enough to afford the defense that we need in a really disruptive world. So it's all tied together. Oh. And if the ambition is, hey, we're really good, but we can be better, why not learn from an organization that takes the best of the best and makes them that much better to go back and teach, so that we're constantly learning and growing? That, I think, is the essence of business. We ought to be constantly learning, constantly growing, in order to be able to make the impact that we have. That's the entry point.
Well, that sure seems like an entry point that almost anybody can walk into then, because I don't know that there's a company out there or a person out there or any organization out there that can say that they're at a point where their ability to improve, or their ability to increase their capability to improve, it's just maxed out. I mean, there's just no more room to go. Right?
Even Toyota Production System, which really, popularized the concept of continuous improvement, for as long as they've been doing it, have been consistently continuing to try to get better. And they've even taken some steps backwards, right? The brake issue a couple of years ago and whatnot.
Right.
Human teams dealing with human things.
The Lexus acceleration.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So there's always opportunities to learn. We're never going to be consistently perfect. That's part of the human condition. And so we have to aspire to learn how to be better as things change around us and change within us. And that's what's exciting. So tying it all back, I used to think that I existed to be a fighter pilot. Now I think I was a fighter pilot to assist in my true life's work of helping organizations and people improve at whatever it is that they do, because all of it is incredibly meaningful. Sometimes we just have to figure out how.
Nicely done. Well, Robert, Cujo, Teschner, thank you so much for being on the show today. This has been a real gift. I'm glad you came on. I'm glad I met you in the first place. I'm glad that you were up in the skies, protecting us. I'm not glad that you got cancer, but I'm glad that having gone through the cancer process has been the new story, or it's actually improved the story of your life. That was just a fabulous way to look at it. And it made you, really relatable to the, average person, right? I mean, all of a sudden you're lumped in with a lot of other people who have a similar problem that's connected to being a human. It's just a human problem. And congratulations for getting past it in 7 years of good cancer-free life that will, I hope, be 7 more and 7 more and 7 more and 7 more.
Yes.
How do you want people to contact you? What's the best way for people to reach out?
The easiest way is through the website, VMaxGroupLLC.com. There's a button that says request an appointment or schedule an appointment. That's the easiest thing. It brings up my calendar, and we'll take it from there. And I've had all kinds of different conversations with folks, not just tied to, hey, can you come work with us? But hey, I've got some questions about something that you said in the podcast, and always happy to accommodate that. So VMaxGroupLLC.com. That's the way to get in touch with me.
All right, super. Cujo, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a great honor.
Mike, thanks for having me. It was a joy to meet you in person. And I was looking forward to today ever since you invited me initially. So thank you. You're doing great work in the world.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.